I love Kris Deltarune. I already liked them when I know that's not their real name. I already liked them when Chapter 2 of Deltarune came out, but Chapter 3 and 4 sent them straight to my number one video game protagonist ever. 2B and Harry Dubois make a podium, congrats to them. Kris is the best execution of a silent protagonist that I've ever seen. Chapter 1 sets them up to be a vessel for the player, and by Chapter 4, they have fully transformed into a properly realised character, complete with goals, likes, dislikes, a full backstory, and personal expression. Because they're a silent protagonist, nearly everything we know about Kris comes from other people. To the player, they're an emotionless, silent person under our complete control. To the other characters in the story, they are a lot more. The most we learn of Kris in Chapter 1 is that they are good at flirting and have a sweet tooth, which is about as much characterization as Frisk had in Undertale, so people were led to believe that they were just a player avatar. But the following chapters blew that perception away. We now know that Kris used to be friends with Noelle when they were children. They were known for their mischievous nature, swearing during carols and constantly playing pranks. They loved and admired their older brother and played video games and shared a room with him. But the disappearance of Des resulted in the splitting of the Holiday and Dreamer households, the divorce of Toriel and Asgore, and with Asriel moving away to college, Kris became isolated. This is how we find them in Chapter 1, and it's a brilliant way to introduce us to the world of the hometown. Since Kris is distant from most people in the town, we the player are given reason for characters to exposit to Kris. It's honestly genius having a fully developed backstory to give reason for this very in-depth character to appear as a blank slate when we meet them. And of course, this all changes when Kris makes friends with Susie and Rousey and reconnects with Noelle in Chapter 2 and beyond. Kris expresses themselves a lot more, especially in their friendship with Susie, being a pair of goblin children who will devour anything. They eat chalk and use Susie as a lawnmower and are constantly on the hunt to eat moss, which is, that's me. Susie is just as isolated and weird as Kris, and they find companionship in each other's weirdness. As Susie opens up and learns to be vulnerable, we see that she really trusts Kris. Having adventures with them in the dark world and a sense of purpose and some real companionship all adds up to Susie softening and allowing herself to be friends with Kris. And Kris clearly likes Susie just as much, given not just their silly interactions when they're goofing off, but also how protective Kris is of Susie. They shield her from seeing the Pixel Kris in the sword route, and look pissed when the player kills the Pixel Susie. They bite their hand to stop the player from saying that they'll never play the piano again after Susie compliments their abilities. There's a lot we can infer about their relationship with other characters too. Like when you tell Rousey that Kris will take Birdley to the festival and they seem to repeat it in shock and horror, as if dating Birdley is a fate worse than death, even though it's not. I love that cringe bird boy. Their relationship with Rousey is clearly not as close as with Susie. They possibly feel uncomfortable hugging Rousey, and they go to lengths to explain how he's not like Asriel. It's possible that Kris is unpleasantly reminded by Rousey of how Asriel is absent in their life, but it's also clear that Kris enjoys Rousey's company as a friend. No one asks him to jump on the floor to mimic Rousey. That's just how they show compassion. Then there's the two characters who they really seem to dislike. The first is Spamton. Kris, for their own reasons, indulges Spamton in meeting with him alone, probably interested in someone who they can relate to. Spamton is a puppet, not able to control his own life, so he says, and he entices Kris with the promise of freedom. But he's also obviously insane, and tries to kill Kris to take their soul. Kris screams after fighting Spamton, I think not just because they were betrayed by someone who could have given them hope for a way to escape their own cage and give themselves freedom, but also because Spamton is the worst of what Kris could be. Spamton represents how characters who know they aren't free can't handle that and simply break. Jevil seemed to delight in his knowledge of the world, but Spamton was tormented. So Kris, seeing what they could be reduced to, is in shock. The other character Kris seems to dislike is Tenna. There's one main implication of this, and it's how Kris does more damage than anyone else to Tenna when they fight him. But that makes sense. Tenna is a painful reminder that Kris's family was torn apart and that the days of watching TV with the holidays are gone. He constantly needles Kris about their unhappy family life, saying that it's normal for parents to fight. Tenna thinks he failed to keep Kris's family together, and maybe Kris partially thinks that too. Of course, he did also kidnap Kris's mother, so that could be pissing Kris off, but that could also be part of Kris's collaboration with the Knight. Speaking of whom, it's undeniable that Kris is working with the Knight in some capacity. We don't know for sure who the Knight is, or if they were the voice on the phone, but the ending of Chapter 3 and the way they signal to the Knight to end the fight if you win pretty clearly points to them being in cahoots. So we've gone from Kris being a silent, expressionless, emotionless protagonist in Chapter 1 to someone with fully realised relationships with other characters and goals that go beyond the player's goals, and even come into conflict with them, all with them never saying a single line of dialogue. And why do we have silent protagonists? It's so that you can be introduced to a world and set your own aims. People hated the voice protagonist in Fallout 4 because it added mandatory expression and character to someone who the player wanted to be a blank slate so that they could project their own personality and headcanon onto them. Kris is introduced to us in this way to make us think that that's all they are, and then the narrative does everything to show that they are so much more. Kris, unlike any player avatar, has a clear narrative theme: freedom. It's an obvious recurring theme in Deltarune. Jevil, Spamton, and Ramb are all, to one degree or another, driven mad by it. They know their choices don't matter, but they're a part of a narrative already decided, and they can't cope with that. Gerson also probably knows this, but he's goated, so it doesn't bother him. But Kris's arc seems to be majorly based around their struggle for freedom. Kris in the narrative of Deltarune is a real person who has the control of their life ripped away from them, so that the player can treat their life like a game. And clearly and very understandably, they hate that. And Kris does seem to hate the player. So when I see people say they don't like Kris for being hostile to the player in Chapter 4, I really can't agree with them. The Snowgrave route turns the player, Kris and Noelle, into monsters. Kris obviously hates when you manipulate them to turn the sweetest, kindest girl they know into a killer and genuinely terrify her. They obviously hate when you use her to hurt Birdley. They glare at the player when you kill Susie and Rousey in the hidden board game because they hate the very idea of hurting their friends. And they hate that you make them do it even in a game. They self-harm, tearing their soul out, causing them self-pain and exhaustion just because they hate you so much. But that doesn't mean they don't mind their life being hijacked in a normal route. The way they lock the soul up at night, the way they're clearly hiding something from us, the way they seem to be planning something with Rousey when we're not looking. Kris clearly doesn't trust us. Even when the player makes their life better, they still wouldn't like knowing that their life was improved by some eldritch being. I mean, would you? Knowing that your friends like you for decisions that you didn't make, for words that you didn't want to say. Susie asks Kris for help against Gerson, but it's not Kris that helps her, it's you, the soul, the player, and Susie doesn't know the difference. And then there's the piano. It's the one skill Kris has really practiced, probably the only ability of theirs that they're really proud of. Noelle mentions how she used to love listening to Kris play because they're a great musician. Kris plays a piano every chance they get, in the hospital, in the holiday house, and in the Dark World. Except, of course, the soul can't play the piano. When they're hijacked, all Kris can do is push keys in frustration. They've had their very skills robbed from them by an otherworldly force. Their expression through music is completely taken away. And the one time the soul takes their hands off the wheel and lets Kris play, we can see that they're a beautiful musician. Kris is prophesized to be a vessel. They are doomed to a fate of being a cage of their very best friends not even knowing that they aren't acting as they want to. The player robs Kris of their own identity. In the rare moments that Kris takes control, we see their identity shine. They high-five Susie and eat moss and steal pie without the player's input. Fundamentally, they are a lonely child who wants to have fun and make mischief and be close with their friends. And yet they are reduced to a player vessel, both by the prophecy and by the player themselves. Kris struggles to know themselves. Kris is the only human in town, surrounded by people who don't look like them, and will always be different. We know as a child they wanted to fit in and look like everyone else, so they made red horns to make themselves look more like a monster. In other words, Kris has body dysmorphia. They don't like how they look because they feel that being different means that they will never find their place in the hometown. By the start of the game, we can see that this has kind of come to pass. Kris is the weird kid with no friends and a distant family. When they look in the mirror every morning, their understanding of who they are seems to slip away. It's already hard enough knowing who you want to be as a teenager, and when you are literally not in control of your actions, it's not surprising that your self-sense would erode. It doesn't help that Kris is bound by fate to be a vessel for someone else. The cage, complete with human parts, but no human dignity, no human will of their own. Kris never had a chance to be themselves. They were inevitably going to be someone else's tool. There's a theory running around at the moment that I really like, which is that Kris is going to lose one or both of their hands. Susie mentions how Kris will always be able to offer them a hand, and the only part of Kris shown in the prophecy is their hands. Hands represent how we act and change the world. They represent our autonomy. If Kris does lose a hand, they will yet again have their own autonomy ripped away from them by the soul or the prophecy or whatever force acts on them. But Kris has not surrendered their sense of self yet. When they have Susie at their side, they find some reassurance. Even not fully understanding who they are, they know that Susie accepts and loves them, and that's enough. That makes sense, doesn't it? When you're with someone who you know won't judge you, you forget to perceive yourself. You don't worry if they like the way you act or look, or if you are performing all the rules of a social interaction properly. When you have fun with someone, you just let your insecurities go and allow yourself to be perceived, not as you want to be, but as you are. And Kris fights to regain their own autonomy. When you try to be cruel to Rousey and Susie, they bite their hand or cough. They use what little power they have to obstruct you being mean to their friends. They work with Carol and the Knight, and probably have been since before Chapter 1, against the Soul's wishes. In the Snowgrave route, they dragged Birdley to the hospital in the middle of the night, and tried to reassure and warn Noelle. They actively rebel against us, taking what precious time they can when they have the control of their body to sabotage the evils of the Snowgrave. I've been referring to Kris as they throughout this entire video, because time and time again, that's how they are referred to in-game. Their mother, their friends, everyone in their community recognise that Kris's pronouns are they/them. They have an androgynous appearance and are never once gendered. They are so clearly non-binary. And yet somehow people still find a way to call Kris a boy and refer to them as he. I see people say that the identity of a fictional character doesn't matter, that it's fine if they call Kris he, and I honestly think those people are just fucking stupid. I'm sorry, if you think this, you're completely missing the point of Kris, and you've just failed to properly engage with the story. When you misgender Kris, you rob them of their autonomy and identity, the very thing the story is criticising the player for doing. Your bigotry and laziness is getting in the way of you properly understanding media. If you called Sans a she or Toriel a he, everyone would obviously point out that those are the wrong pronouns for that character. Yet somehow people defend misgendering Kris because it doesn't matter. How can you manage to use the correct pronouns for every character except the one whose identity is a major part of their characterization? It's blatant transphobia, and if you come to a Toby Fox game expecting to be bigoted towards queer people, then just fuck off. There are people who will correct themselves when they misgender Kris, and I appreciate that. A lot of people just don't know a non-binary person in their life, or English isn't their first language, or they just straight up missed it when playing the game. A lot of people will make the effort to use Kris's proper pronouns, even if they get it wrong at first, and that does make me smile. The reason I care so much about this isn't just because I like Kris as a character. It was the release of Deltarune Chapter 2 that began my fascination with Kris, and among other things was their gender presentation. I saw how they were androgynous and their gender just wasn't an important part of their presentation, and over time I realised that I wanted that to apply to myself. Kris is by far the most widespread, explicit non-binary representation we've ever had in gaming, and that made an impact on me. For now, I want to go by they/them. I want to be agender, and if I hadn't seen Kris and fallen in love with their characterization, then maybe those cogs wouldn't have turned in my head. There's not many pieces of media that have made me really want to change who I am, but Deltarune is one of them, and Kris was the cause of that. So Kris is important to me. The more I learn about them and see them live out their life, the more I love them. I don't care if their motivations for working with the Knight and opening dark fountains are good or evil, because I just want to see more of who they are. It genuinely brings me joy to see Kris acting in any way at all. When they sleep on the couch and Toriel squeezes their cheek at breakfast, I just smile because I love to see this character being themselves. They went from someone you could project your own wants and ideas on to someone you couldn't. Kris is their own person, regardless of your perception of them. I can't help but love that. So, thank you for watching this little love letter to Kris Deltarune. I have to say like and subscribe to make the numbers go up, and I've said it now so I can tick that box off. If this is the sort of content you like, then check out the last video I did about Deltarune and the themes of confidence and art. Also, definitely stick around because I'm planning, if all goes well, on making at least three, or maybe 4, no promises, more of these kind of character analysis videos for other Deltarune characters. Other than that, I just want to thank everyone who's been supporting me. I've had so many nice comments on my videos and I really do appreciate the kindness. So, like, subscribe, etc., and goodbye.